My name is Harold Gentry. After 25 years of loyalty, I was fired without warning. No thank you, no goodbye. The code I built in silence was stolen, my name erased, my worth ignored. I was devastated, humiliated, furious. But I didn't disappear. I stood up, fought back, and took my name and my dignity back. If you're still listening, stay with me until the end. Then tell me, did I do the right thing? Would you have done the same? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. I still remembered that Monday. The weather wasn't cold, not really, but the air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. October in Minneapolis has its own kind of silence, especially in the early morning. The kind that makes you listen harder, like something's about to break. I pulled into the Atlasyn Technologies lot the way I always did, parking in the same space I'd claimed for over 2 decades. Nothing looked different. Same glass facade. Same flickering fluorescent bulb above the loading dock door. But something felt off. Not wrong, just distant. Like I was walking into a room that used to be mine but no longer remembered me. I badge swiped my way through the lobby, past the scrolling digital screens, the ping of Slack messages bouncing from open laptops, the hushed voices of young engineers who barely made eye contact with me anymore. I wasn't bitter, not exactly. More like tired in a way I couldn't explain. People smiled politely, but their eyes slid away. Nobody wanted to linger too long near the old guy. 25 years. I started when this place was a 4-man outfit renting a 2-room suite in a strip mall across from the old post office. Back then, we built things from scratch, stayed up nights solving real problems, not clicking through Jira tickets for the sake of optics. Now it was about efficiency metrics and streamlining. And I was no longer considered either. The last 6 months had made it obvious, even if no one said it out loud. I wasn't invited to product meetings anymore. My review score last quarter? Consistent, but lacks adaptability. Funny, considering I was the one who rewrote our internal systems to handle 10x traffic after that merger, without downtime. But there was always a new name, a newer method, someone quicker to say yes and ask fewer questions. I used to believe loyalty meant something. That if I kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed honest, the company would take care of me. But Atlasyn didn't listen to voices like mine anymore. Not if they came from mouths with laugh lines and gray hair. Mid-morning, I got the calendar ping. HR meeting, 10:30 a.m., room 401. No details. No context. Just those words and a knot in my stomach. I walked the long corridor toward 401, passing offices I'd helped wire when we expanded. Nobody made eye contact. I pushed open the door to find a young woman I didn't recognize. Tablet in hand, too cheery by half. And no Colin. Colin Trask, the new VP of engineering. The same kid I trained when he was a shaky intern from St. Olaf's. Back then, he couldn't troubleshoot a failed server without Googling it twice. I'd stayed late with him more nights than I could count. Taught him how to debug blindfolded. Showed him the backend like it was a living thing, not a codebase. But now, he didn't even bother to show. Mr. Gentry, the HR rep began like she was reading a weather report. This meeting is to inform you that your position has been impacted as part of a departmental restructuring effort. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? She shifted in her seat. Your role has been classified as redundant under the current roadmap. The leadership team has identified a strategic need to transition toward a leaner, more agile workforce. We'll be offering a 2-week severance. Colin couldn't be here. I interrupted. I was asked to facilitate this conversation, she replied, not quite meeting my eyes. You'll have access to your account until noon today. IT will assist with offboarding. That was it. No thank you. No acknowledgement of the decades I gave them. Just sterile phrases and a badge-sized envelope that held my end. I stood up, not trusting myself to speak. My fingers were tight around the chair for a second longer than necessary, but I let go. I walked out slowly, letting the silence fall around me like a second skin. Down the hallway, past the code sprint posters and open snack bars, until I came to the photo. It hung just outside the engineering bullpen, our team photo from 2005. I was in the center, arms crossed, tired but proud. And there, off to the side, stood Colin. Wide-eyed, nervous, eager to learn. I remembered the night we took that picture. Blizzard warnings on the radio. Everyone else had gone home. But Colin stayed, wanting to know how to reboot the server manually. I showed him line by line, even though it was almost midnight. Even though I'd promised my wife I'd be home for dinner. And now, that same kid couldn't even look me in the eye. I stared at the photo a moment longer, then turned away. Some exits happen with slamming doors. Mine? It was the quiet kind. But the silence was loud enough to break something inside me. And I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. I didn't go home right away. After I left the building, I just drove around aimlessly for a while, windows down despite the chill. At some point, without thinking, I ended up pulling into the tiny parking lot behind the ground beneath, the cafe off Hennepin that used to stay open late back in the early days. There was a time I practically lived in that place. Debugging code at midnight, Colin sitting across from me with his hoodie pulled tight and his hands shaking from too much coffee. Now it was mid-afternoon and almost empty, save for a couple students huddled over laptops and a guy sketching in a moleskine by the window. I ordered a black coffee, the same way I had for 20 years, and took a seat near the back wall, where the hum of the espresso machine softened everything. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the chipped mug in front of me. My phone buzzed twice, once from a friend request on LinkedIn, probably someone at Atlasyn trying to pretend they cared, and once from my wife, asking what I wanted for dinner. I didn't reply to either. The door jingled and I glanced up. I didn't expect to see Dale. He looked older than I remembered. His beard had gone full white, and he had that slow, deliberate walk people get when their body's been through more than their pride will admit. But he still had that quiet, level gaze, like he was always reading 3 lines beneath what you were saying. He stopped when he saw me. "Well, damn," he said. "They finally did it." I gave a tired smile. "Yeah, clean cut. 2-week severance. No eye contact." He nodded, like it confirmed something he'd already known. "You want to talk about it?" I motioned to the chair across from me. "Sure. Nothing else on my schedule." He eased down, took a sip from a mug he must have already had, and leaned in. "They didn't even let you say goodbye. Didn't even let me finish my coffee," I muttered. Dale chuckled once, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Same thing happened to me, back when we were pushing the new QA model, and I refused to skip the regression tests. CEO said I was slowing innovation. I said I was saving our asses. Guess who won?" I nodded. I remembered. Dale had been forced out 4 years ago. They gave him a plaque and a cake and quietly cut him loose before the next code freeze. He studied me for a moment. "You still got that old logic handler you wrote that Christmas?" I blinked. "What?" "You remember," he said. "Back in 2012. You were working that side module after hours, data integrity routing. The thing with the multi-node buffer you designed from scratch." I sat back, suddenly remembering the long nights at my kitchen table, the whiteboard in the basement, the way I'd built that whole thing from the ground up because I couldn't sleep until it worked. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I still have the old build. On a thumb drive somewhere." Dale leaned forward. "You ever license it to Atlasyn?" "No," I said. I showed it to Colin, back before he was anybody. He said it might be useful someday, so I plugged it into a sandbox build. But there was no formal handoff, no contract, not even an internal ticket. He raised an eyebrow. "You checked their product backend lately?" I frowned. "Why?" "Because my niece works over there in DevOps. She mentioned a module that sounded a lot like yours, only they call it CoreStream now. Buried in the dependency chain. She didn't know it came from you." My throat went dry. "You think they're using it in production?" "I think they've been using it for years. And I think nobody gave you credit or asked your permission." I didn't say anything for a while. My mind was running in 2 directions. One part remembering every late night I spent perfecting that logic tree, and the other trying to wrap around the idea that they'd taken it, quietly folded it into their platform, and never said a damn word. Dale finished his coffee and stood. "Look, I'm not saying sue the bastards. Yet. But you might want to look through your files. And maybe talk to someone who knows what ownership really means. He put a hand on my shoulder before he left. They took your job. Don't let them take your name, too. I sat there long after he'd gone, the hum of the cafe fading into the buzz in my ears. Somewhere in a storage box in my basement, I had a thumb drive with that code on it. And maybe, just maybe, that little piece of logic I wrote alone in the dark might be the only leverage I had left. But first, I needed to find it. The following Thursday, I returned to Atlasyn for the last time. The company made it clear that offboarding would happen on their terms. Specific time slot, badge access deactivated by noon, and an HR rep shadowing me while I boxed up 25 years of my life. They'd scheduled it like a dentist appointment. Cold. Clinical. When I stepped out of the elevator on the 3rd floor, everything looked the same. Same brushed metal signage. Same smell of burnt coffee from the kitchen pod. But I could feel the difference in how the air moved around me. Like the building itself had already erased my name. HR had assigned a young guy named Evan to watch me pack. He stood at a distance near the entrance, pretending to check his phone, but I could see the tension in his posture. He wasn't comfortable being there. Can't blame him. No one wants to babysit a fired employee twice their age. I kept things quiet. Took down the framed photo of my daughter from the shelf, the old mug with a binary joke printed on it, a stack of handwritten diagrams I'd saved from the early days. I didn't look around much, but I could feel a few eyes on me, new hires who knew my name but didn't really know me. Nobody said a word. When I turned the corner to grab my backup drive from the secure storage cabinet, that's when I saw him, Colin, standing by the end of the hallway, arms folded, a half smile trying too hard to look casual. "Hey," he said. "Didn't expect to run into you." I didn't respond. He took a step closer. "Look, about everything. I'm really sorry how it happened. It wasn't personal. You know how these things go, realignment, board pressure, new growth strategy. It was out of my hands." I studied him for a moment. Tailored jacket. Polished tone. The way he said realignment like it was just another feature rollout. I didn't say anything. He shifted. "You were the foundation of a lot of what we built. I hope you know that." That word, were, rubbed like sandpaper. Past tense, clean and final. I could feel the pressure building in my chest, but I swallowed it down. No use giving him the reaction he expected. Instead, I nodded once, turned back toward my desk, and said, "I need to finish up." His footsteps faded behind me. But my thoughts didn't. I remembered the night Colin called me in a panic. His first solo deployment had gone sideways. He couldn't isolate a server failure. It was 2 a.m, and I was supposed to be on vacation. Still, I logged in, walked him through the fix step by step, never once mentioning it in my timesheet. I remembered defending him when the VP at the time wanted him reassigned. I argued he had potential, that all he needed was someone to guide him. That same VP got laid off the following year, and Colin began climbing. And now he was the one pushing people like me out the door. Not out of cruelty, maybe, but out of ambition, out of a desire to be the kind of leader who makes the hard calls. I finished packing and was about to unplug my old development monitor when I noticed something odd on the internal dashboard still left open. A set of system logs tied to an internal module marked as Legacy Utility, approved for continuous use. I clicked through, more out of habit than curiosity. That's when my stomach turned. There, embedded deep in the architecture, was a tool set with a naming convention I recognized instantly. The same logic stream I'd written nearly 10 years ago, the one I had built during off hours, with no official request and never formally assigned. The comments in the code were mine, my shorthand, my syntax. The system had wrapped it in a newer interface, renamed it, and pushed it into live deployment. No attribution, no contract. Just quietly absorbed like it had always belonged to them. I took a screenshot. Then I plugged in the backup drive I just picked up and saved the relevant logs and config info. This wasn't a matter of pride anymore. It was legal, ethical, and it changed everything. Colin hadn't just pushed me out. He'd taken something I built with my own hands, folded it into the company's product line, and let it ride, probably assuming I'd never notice. Or worse, that I wouldn't do anything if I did. I zipped my bag, logged off the terminal, and took one last look around the office. No one looked up. No goodbyes. Just rows of glowing screens, and people pretending nothing had happened. But something had. And deep down, I knew I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I spent the weekend knee-deep in old drives and thumbsticks, surrounded by boxes I hadn't opened in years. The basement smelled like cardboard and cold cement, but it was quiet, and I needed quiet. The kind that helps you think clearly when everything inside you wants to shut down. I found the original Logic module late Saturday night. The naming conventions were mine. The folder structure was unmistakable. I even had a few voice memos saved in the subdirectory. Me, talking through bugs out loud at 1 a.m. like I was hosting my own little tech radio show. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. What mattered wasn't just the code, it was the timeline. The timestamps showed it was built long before it ever touched Atlasyn servers. No commit logs under the company repo, no mention of it in any Jira ticket. Just me, working on a side project during my own time, hoping to fix a problem nobody else seemed to care about. I loaded the old build on a spare laptop, cross-referenced it with the live system logs I'd saved from the office. It was a match. Not a derivative, not a rework, exact same logic, exact same structure. They'd wrapped it in prettier packaging, sure, but the engine under the hood was mine. I sat there in the basement for a long while, the screen casting a pale glow on the shelves of dusty binders and backup routers. Part of me didn't want to move forward. I'm not a litigious guy. I never have been. The idea of suing someone, of dragging things through lawyers and courtrooms, felt like lighting a fire I wasn't sure I could put out. But another part of me couldn't stop thinking about what Dale had said. They didn't just take your job. They took your silence to justify what they'd done. That line wouldn't leave me alone. Sunday morning, I made coffee and opened my email out of habit. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a message with no subject line and a name I didn't recognize. rosa.l@atlasyntech.io. I clicked it. Mr. Gentry, it began. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I wasn't sure if I should, but I couldn't let this sit with me anymore. I sat up straighter. I just wanted you to know, she wrote, your termination wasn't part of a general restructure. I saw the KPI report the week before, and someone had edited your productivity metrics. The numbers were altered right before they went to the executive team. I can't prove it, but I'm fairly certain it was Colin. He made a point to frame your work as outdated, even though the core stream module is still based on your original logic. She ended it with, I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted you to know it wasn't fair. I've learned a lot from your work and from the way you handled yourself. I'm sorry. I read it twice. Then, again. The part of me that had been trying to justify staying quiet, telling myself it wasn't worth it, that maybe I was overreacting, suddenly felt hollow. Like I'd been looking for a way to explain it all away so I wouldn't have to act. But now, I could not act. Later that afternoon, I met Dale at the same cafe. He listened while I read Rosa's email out loud. When I finished, he just nodded and said, now you have 2 reasons to stand up. One for you. One for her. I took a slow breath. You still have that contact, the IP lawyer you used back when you left? Yeah, he said. She's solid. Doesn't blink easy. Think she talked to me? I already asked, he said. She's expecting your call. That night, I scanned everything. Code snapshots. Metadata. The original version history. I backed it all up on 2 drives, stored one in my safe. I printed the logs and labeled every page like I was prepping for a deposition. I wasn't going in angry. I wasn't looking to burn the place down. But I was done being quiet. And if they wanted to build a future on top of my work without my name, without my permission, they were going to have to go through me first. Monday morning came quiet and gray. I didn't sleep much the night before, too many thoughts stacking up like unfiled folders in my mind. I had a legal pad filled with notes, screenshots printed and spread across the dining room table, and my phone set to ring volume high in case Dale's lawyer called. Her name was Andrea Malloy. Dale said she didn't waste time, and he wasn't kidding. By 9:15, she was already on a video call with me, glasses on the edge of her nose, flipping through documents I'd emailed 2 hours earlier. "So let me get this straight," she said. "You built the core logic handler independently, before it was adopted into Atlasyn's infrastructure?" I nodded. It was a side project. No formal ticket, no work directive. Just me solving a problem on my own time. They didn't ask for it. I brought it in later as a prototype. "Do you have proof of authorship? Timestamps? Metadata?" I showed her the backup files, some dated nearly 2 years before the logic module appeared in their internal repository. Old code commits, video clips of me screen sharing while testing it, a signed email thread between me and Colin when I first floated the concept. She leaned back in her chair. "They're using this in production?" I hesitated, then said, "Yes. It's buried deep, but it's running as part of their core stream chain." Andrea didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "You're the legal owner. That's black letter copyright law. If it wasn't created under employment terms or with a written agreement transferring ownership, it's yours." The relief I felt wasn't joy. It was something closer to validation. A kind of quiet weight being lifted. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't bitter. I had a right to speak up. She continued, "We don't have to sue right away. First step is a formal notice, a takedown letter under the DMCA. Let's give them a window to respond before going nuclear." That sounded like me. Measured. Firm. Fair. I was just about to thank her when Dale called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened immediately after we hung up. "Call me back," he said. "You're going to want to hear this." Back at the ground beneath an hour later, Dale already had 2 coffees on the table. He looked more animated than usual, like he just walked out of a boardroom and was still buzzing from it. "You remember Karen's song? He used to work in compliance before she went to Voxbridge Capital." I nodded. Karen was sharp, quiet, paid attention to the stuff nobody else did. Well, I had lunch with her last Friday. She mentioned Atlasyn's prepping for Series C. I raised an eyebrow. "Already? They just locked down B a year ago." "Exactly," he said. "They're trying to position CoreStream as their golden goose, scalable, proprietary, patentable. It's what they're pitching." I sat back slowly. "So if I drop a copyright claim now?" He nodded. "It'd raise red flags. Serious ones. Investors don't pour millions into a platform that might get locked in litigation over code ownership." I stared at the steam rising from my cup. "I'm not trying to blow the whole thing up," I said. "But if they're building their next chapter off work they stole, then no, I'm not sitting down quietly." Dale didn't smile. He just looked proud in that quiet, weathered way of his. "You're not burning bridges," he said. "You're just making sure they don't build them out of your bones." That night, I sat at my desk long after the house went quiet. I opened my Bible more out of habit than certainty and flipped until something caught my eye. "Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." Proverbs 31 verse 9. I must have read that verse 100 times, but tonight it felt different. Not because I saw myself as some noble defender, but because I realized staying silent, in this case, would have meant letting others walk the same road I just did. Around midnight, I sent Andrea the green light. We drafted the formal notice, clear, factual, firm. A request for Atlasyn to either cease using the module or negotiate proper licensing terms within 14 business days. The letter went out on a Wednesday. Andrea sent it via certified email and followed up with a hard copy by courier. Everything was there: timestamps, commit history, screenshots of file structures, even an archived email thread between me and Colin from back in the early days. The message was simple: cease using the logic handler I created or negotiate a license. They had 14 business days to respond. If they ignored it, we'd pursue formal legal action, including a DMCA takedown and civil suit. By Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Caller ID: unknown. But I knew that number. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. The third time, I answered. "Harold," Colin said, trying to sound measured. "Got a moment?" I didn't say anything. Just let the silence do the work. He took that as a yes. I saw the letter. "And look, we really don't need to go down this road. This whole thing's just gotten out of hand. Has it? I said. There was a pause. You could have reached out to me directly. We could have talked through this like professionals. Talked, huh? I leaned back in my chair. Like the talk we had when you reorganized my department? Or when HR handed me my walking papers and you disappeared? That wasn't personal. It was business. And this is legal, I cut in. Don't confuse silence for agreement. He tried again. We're in a critical place right now. There are investors involved. The last thing we need is public noise. Then you should have thought of that, I said, before you built your roadmap on my work without asking. He exhaled, but it wasn't anger, it was nerves. What do you want? I almost laughed. It wasn't about what I wanted. Not anymore. It was about what was owed. Right now. I said. Respect. Recognition. And maybe a little reminder that people like me don't just vanish when it's convenient. The call ended without resolution. By Monday, I heard through Dale that things had gotten noisy. Someone inside Atlasyn's legal team had leaked the letter. Whether intentional or not, I didn't know. But it started showing up on a few niche tech forums. Then, Reddit. A post titled Senior Engineer at Atlasyn files copyright claim over core stream module made the front page of a startup subreddit. Comments poured in, some speculative, some supportive. A few claimed to be former Atlasyn employees who'd seen how the company treated older engineers. One comment in particular stuck with me. Harold was the real deal. Taught me everything about scalable load balancing. Management didn't even invite him to the core stream launch party. That one hit harder than I expected. Meanwhile, the company tried to keep quiet. No press statements. No formal rebuttal. But things started shifting. A contact of mine in compliance, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, sent me a text late one night. Investor counsel asking tough questions about IP integrity. Looks like your letter hit the right nerve. That next morning, Colin called again. This time, I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail. Harold, this is getting out of control. Look, maybe we didn't handle your exit the right way, but this isn't good for anyone. Can we just talk? I deleted the message without playing the rest. Funny how quickly the tone shifts when people start paying attention. When silence turns into momentum. Andrea called me that afternoon. They've responded, she said. No counterclaim, no threats. Just a vague, we're reviewing internally and will respond accordingly. I smirked. Translation. They're nervous, she said. And they should be. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the last bit of daylight slip behind the trees. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt clear. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't playing defense. I wasn't keeping my head down or swallowing my frustration. I had stood up, not out of revenge, but out of something simpler. Self-respect. They could ignore a name on a door, a face in a hallway, but not a man who knew what he built and refused to pretend otherwise. The conference room was glass-walled and sterile, high up on the 25th floor of a downtown office building. Not Atlasyn's campus. This was neutral ground, Andrea's firm. Across the table sat two men in dark suits from Atlasyn's legal team, a junior associate typing every word like it might change someone's future, and a third chair still empty. I kept my hands folded. Andrea was calm, composed, flipping through the latest version of the licensing proposal they had submitted the day before. It was, in plain terms, a lowball offer wrapped in legal fluff, a quiet one-time payment below market value, and a mutual NDA to ensure no one ever heard about any of it. They wanted to make it disappear, quietly. They'd underestimated how much of me had reawakened these past few weeks. Andrea glanced at me before speaking. Let me be clear. Mr. Gentry is not interested in a buyout for silence. He's willing to negotiate a fair license for continued use of his logic handler, provided there's acknowledgement of ownership in writing and appropriate compensation. Otherwise, we will proceed. One of the lawyers frowned. That's going to complicate things for our client. It already is, I said, voice steady. The door opened and Colin walked in. He looked thinner than I remembered. Not sick, just stressed. Collar stiff, jaw set too tight. He took the empty seat across from me, like he hadn't once stood beside me in a freezing server room 15 years ago, running tests while the rest of the building slept. "I thought it'd be better if we just talked," he said, face to face. I didn't respond. He took a breath. "Harold, you've got to see where we're coming from. You were part of the team. This wasn't some theft. We iterated off your work, sure, but you never made any claim of exclusivity. It was integrated through collaborative effort." Andrea stayed silent. She didn't need to speak yet. This part was mine. I leaned forward. "In December of 2013, I emailed you a prototype. The logic stream, raw code, initial documentation. I offered it up as a personal tool I'd built during a holiday break. You replied." I slid a printout across the table. Colin stared at the email, now printed and highlighted. "Looks promising. Let's try to wrap it in the new system." No formal assignment. No IP clause. Just casual acknowledgement. Enough to show they'd known it was mine. Enough to show they'd used it anyway. Colin's face didn't shift much, but his hands tightened around the armrest of his chair. "That wasn't meant as a contract," he said. "It was informal. You never objected." "I never objected," I repeated, because I didn't think I had to defend my own work from someone I mentored. Silence dropped like a sheet across the room. I kept going calmly. "You had a choice. You could have told me what was happening. You could have asked. You didn't. You waited until I was inconvenient, then made sure the door shut behind me." Colin looked down at the table. "I didn't handle that part well. I'll admit that." "No," I said, "you handled it exactly how you wanted to. That's the difference." Andrea spoke again. "We'd like to return to the licensing terms." The next 30 minutes were dry and transactional. Back and forth over usage, retroactive credit, duration, and visibility. Atlasyn's team began to bend. Slowly. Not from threat, but from weight. The weight of truth, backed by facts, backed by silence broken. When it was done, the attorneys stepped out to call their board. Andrea and I waited. I looked out the window. It had started to snow. Eventually, they returned. One of them cleared his throat. "We've agreed to proceed with licensing negotiations under your client's terms. And separately, the board has asked Mr. Trask to step away from his role, effective immediately, pending internal review." I looked at Colin. He didn't fight it. He didn't flinch. He just nodded, like a man who'd finally realized the cost of his shortcuts. He stood to leave. As he passed me, I said one last thing. "You didn't have to cut anyone down to succeed, Colin. But you did, and now you live with that." He paused, almost said something, then kept walking. I didn't need revenge. I had something better. I had my name back. The paperwork came through on a Monday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table, watching the last of the snow melt on the deck stairs, when Andrea called. "It's done," she said. "They've signed." Atlasyn agreed to a full licensing deal for the logic handler I'd created, retroactive compensation, attribution in product documentation, and a formal letter recognizing my technical contributions from 2005 through 2022. The wording was clear, respectful, not flowery, just the truth, finally written down. They also included a clause sealing the financial terms from public disclosure. That was fine by me. I wasn't looking for headlines. The number was more than fair. Enough to cover the mortgage, help my daughter with grad school, and finally take Martha to that bed and breakfast she kept pointing out every time we drove up north. I didn't celebrate. Not in the way you might expect. No champagne. No victory lap. Instead, I made a fresh pot of coffee, stood by the window, and exhaled something I'd been holding in for a long time. Later that week, word got out internally that Colin had been transitioned out of his role. The phrase they used was strategic restructuring, but everyone knew. He wasn't on the next investor deck. His profile vanished from the company's leadership page overnight. I didn't gloat. Truth is, I felt sorry for him. He was a bright kid once, sharp, curious, eager to prove himself. But somewhere along the way, he started mistaking silence for consent and shortcuts for strategy. He gambled on nobody noticing, or maybe on nobody caring enough to fight back. But someone did. About a week after the agreement was signed, I got an email from Rosa. Just a few lines. Today, they passed over you again. But I learned something important watching all this unfold. Sometimes, staying quiet is its own kind of betrayal. Thank you for not staying quiet. I stared at those words for a long time. It wasn't about me anymore. Not really. It was about what happens when one person says, enough, and means it. When someone decides that being the good soldier isn't worth it if it costs you your name. I didn't go back to corporate life. Didn't want to. But a few consulting gigs trickled in, small teams, early stage platforms, the kind that actually listen when you talk. I made it clear up front. I only work where value isn't measured solely by youth or noise. If that narrows the pool, so be it. Every Wednesday evening, I still play the organ at Grace Hill Chapel. Same weathered keys, same pews, same handful of old-timers who nod their heads with their eyes closed. It's not much, but it's honest. And sometimes, Dale and I meet at the ground beneath. Same table near the back. He still drinks black coffee. I switched to decaf. We talk shop, share old war stories, and laugh at how young we all were when we thought loyalty alone would be enough. I think a lot these days about what it means to walk away with your dignity intact. Not because someone hands it to you, but because you refuse to leave it behind. I didn't win some grand legal battle. I didn't topple a tech empire. I didn't even go viral. What I did was simpler. I reminded them and myself that I was never invisible. I showed up. I spoke up. I asked for what was right. And I didn't flinch when the room got quiet. No revenge. No drama. Just one man refusing to be written out of his own story. I didn't win the race for power or glory or promotion. I just refused to let them pretend I was never there. And for me, that was enough. Sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't mean shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes, it's just choosing not to disappear quietly. If you've ever felt overlooked, pushed aside, or made to question your worth, I hope this story reminded you that your value isn't up for debate. Have you ever faced a moment like that? If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll join me again. There's always more to share. And maybe, more healing to find together.